Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com, talking once again with immigration lawyer Michael O'Rourke. Michael, good to see you.
Hi, Sean. How's it going?
Going very well. Thank you very much. Let's dive right in with our 9 reasons you may be inadmissible to Canada. I know we've been talking off camera and how you've said you get a lot of email and phone calls about inadmissibility issues, and they fall somewhere in this menu here. We're going to go into each of them in some detail, starting with security risk, all the way down to if you have a family member who's not allowed into Canada, that could pose some problems. So let's start with number 1 on your list, security risk. Talk about that.
Hi, Sean. So security risk, this is kind of an amorphous, if you have flagged on some sort of security or police database somewhere, maybe you haven't necessarily been convicted of a crime, but maybe you're a person of interest, or for more national security type of issues, you have been involved with organizations that are under suspicion. So a security risk can be broad. If a person is turned back at the border because they are a security risk, we will almost never find out exactly what the risk is, because governments hold on to this information very tightly.
So this could be something as big as, like, say, state espionage and stuff like that.
Yes.
Okay. Working in labs and things could trigger something like that.
It could. So yeah, it's unfortunately, we never really know the exact contours. And for our clients who have been determined to be security risks, sometimes it's a spouse who is the security risk, and sometimes it's the person themselves, but we really don't know unless the client tells us. We're almost never able to get the exact basis of the risk and the exact information on it from the government.
Very cloak and dagger. Very interesting. Number 2, human or international rights violations could have you inadmissible to Canada.
Yes, exactly. And so this is more for people who have participated in different conflicts, or whether declared or not. Say, for instance, somebody who was participating actively in Rwandan genocide or in Colombian paramilitary groups. This is quite broad and quite fact specific. But again, if information surfaces connecting the person to one of these activities, or even the suspicion of being involved in human rights violations, they could be deemed inadmissible to Canada.
All right. Number 3, convicted of a crime, or, and this one's interesting to me, have committed an act outside Canada that would have been a crime in Canada.
Exactly. And you don't have to necessarily be convicted if this happened outside of Canada. If you were arrested, if you were charged, but say the charges were dropped, it is very wide in interpretation. And we could spend hours talking about criminal inadmissibility, because it, again, super highly fact specific. But if you are involved in any sort of criminal activity, convicted or not, or activity that might be a crime in Canada, you're going to have issues coming over the border. A couple of my favorite examples, I had a client years ago who is a stupid 18-year-old, had, with some friends, taken a bat and knocked down a bunch of mailboxes in rural Alaska. Well, he was rounded up by the local sheriff, and there was an FBI report made for destruction of federal property. This is like 50 years ago.
50 years. Holy
50
smoke.
years. And he had been coming back and forth to Canada, had a Canadian wife, and all of a sudden, some databases got knitted together, and this charge for, or at least mention of destruction of federal property, showed up on his FBI report. And Canada and the US have a very broad sharing of information.
Interesting.
Yeah, so he showed up at the border, said, I'm coming up to see my wife. He said, "Oh no, there's this very serious crime of destruction of federal property. You cannot come in, sir."
Wow.
And
So I guess word to the wise is to if somebody has something in their past that they might be wanting to hide from others, they should call you and talk to you about it before they find it at the border that it could get them in some trouble.
exactly, it's much better to talk to me and my team here than figuring it out the hard way.
Okay.
And a lot of people, they find out, or they might have written it off because it happened years and years ago,
Sure.
and they don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah, I've heard about people with like a DUI from when they were 20 years old. Now they're 50. They're coming up on a fishing trip or something like this, and they say, "Hey, turn around! You've got this drunk driving conviction." Because, as you've explained to me before, Canada looks at drunk driving convictions much more seriously, at least the first time, than the United States.
Exactly.
Okay. Number 4, ties to organized crime. This kind of ties in with the earlier ones with the security risk and stuff, but maybe a little more specific to criminality.
Yes. So you don't necessarily have to have been convicted of racketeering, which is the charge in the US. But if, again, there is information in either political or national security or police databases tying you to organized crime, then it is very possible, whether it's true or not, honestly, or whether it's ever been proven in a court of law, this can be a basis to deny you entry to Canada. It's very much like the security exception to allowing people to enter. The Canadian government feels that if a person has ties to organized crime, that they are prone to perhaps furthering that criminal enterprise when they come to Canada.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit about the sports teams. They don't, the leagues don't like their players hanging out with known crime figures because it opens them up to maybe bribery or throwing games and things like that. So it's the same kind of idea, I think, here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Number 5, this might surprise people somewhat. Canada is known as a welcoming place. It's famous for its universal health care. But number 5, serious health problems can have you inadmissible.
Yes. And this we see very often. If you're coming as a tourist, this isn't really going to apply to you unless you have something that is an actively communicable disease, like active tuberculosis or a COVID infection, for instance. So that's the tourist side of things. But where we see this more is in the context for permanent residents. If you're coming as anybody other than a spouse, say you're coming as an economic immigrant, you have to ensure that your medical conditions, whatever they might be, aren't serious enough that they would place a burden on the Canadian healthcare system. And what's considered a burden is actually a fairly low dollar amount, between $5,000 and $6,000.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
So that's a pretty small window, isn't it?
Yes. So what happens in this case, and we can discuss this more at another time, but for an applicant for permanent residence, if the medical exam uncovers some health problem that is considered serious and potentially burdensome, the Immigration Ministry, IRCC, will issue what's known as a fairness letter, and they will say you might be potentially inadmissible to Canada and prove to us that you're not. And
Wow.
usually with these fairness letters come very expensive courses of treatment. And there are ways that we can rebut this, but it's something you shouldn't do on your own.
Okay. Number 6, serious financial problems. So what, heavy debt, bankruptcy, that kind of thing?
It's more bankruptcy. And again, this isn't going to usually apply to somebody just coming up for the fishing trip over the weekend. This is going to be more in the context of a permanent residence application. You have to declare on your application forms whether you've ever resorted to bankruptcy protection or insolvency or restructuring, depending on what it's called in your country. But anything that wipes away debt or restructures your debt, and it's done through a government or a court process, could trigger a more serious review, an in-depth review of your financial history.
Okay. Number 7, lie. And this is a big one. I know you talk about this a lot. Number 7, lied in an application or on an interview or in an interview, and that comes under the umbrella of misrepresentation.
Yes. So we see misrepresentation a lot. Sometimes it's an active untruth. It's like, I'm going to lie to the border officer to get X or to do X. Sometimes it's innocent, where somebody says, I'm going to the airport, but actually they're going to see their girlfriend. So misrepresentation, of course, is scalable, and if the misrepresentation is considered material, that means it is used to further your chances to get a benefit under immigration law, then that can be used as a basis either to deny you entry into the country the next time or remove you from the country if that has been part of your immigration record. It's very serious, and because misrepresentation goes to malice, if you'll say, something with a bad intention, especially when there's active intentional misrepresentation, that will follow you.
Yeah, they keep a track of this. Like that could be like we were talking about with the DUI, 10, 15 years later, if you misrepresented yourself, it's on that computer screen forever, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And they're not likely to believe you the next time.
Right. Okay. Number 8, you do not, and this is kind of a big general one. We can throw everything under this umbrella, but you do not meet the conditions in Canada's immigration law.
Yes, this is a huge catch-all. It can almost be anything. For instance, if you're from a country where you need a visa to enter Canada and you show up at the border and you don't have a visa, you're not meeting the conditions of Canada's immigration law.
Right.
It is, again, so wide, but it is a general thing that you're going to hear at the border if for some reason you don't qualify. Either you don't qualify to come in under the visa type that you have, or you need more documentation, or if they don't really specify any other grounds, this will be the catch-all that they say that you just don't meet the conditions.
Right. I've had friends before and colleagues say, should I or can I? And I'm like, look, it's worth a consultation. If you're not sure about the paperwork and stuff, you should get a consultation and find out before you get to the border.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can sit in my office for half an hour, or you can sit at the border for 6 hours while they figure it out.
Right. Money well spent. Number 9, this is kind of a sins of the father vibe to it, but you have a family member who is not allowed into Canada, and that makes you inadmissible. Explain that.
Yeah, so if you have, again, this is generally in the permanent residence context, although this can happen at the border too. Say you have a family unit, mother and father and 2 kids, and one of the kids has a very expensive medical condition, or say the other kid has an active tuberculosis infection. So they are going to look at the family as a whole and say, well, because child 1 has this medical condition, or child 2 is actively infectious and poses a public health risk to Canada, we are not letting the family come in as a group. It happens from time to time. Unfortunately, every member of the family must be admissible in order for the family to come into Canada.
And by coming to Canada, we're talking like the immigration part, or is it also tourism, or?
Yes, this is usually the immigration part, but this can happen at the port of entry when, say, you might have somebody in the family car who has a DUI. They're not generally going to let everybody else in the car over and leave you stranded at the border. It happens more in the permanent residence context, but you can see it at
Excellent.
border applications.
Okay, those are our 9 reasons that you might find yourself inadmissible to Canada. As we said, it's probably worth the consultation. If something in those 9 points is triggering something in your past, or some thoughts that you might apply to, or some of those might apply to you, I think contacting you, Michael, might be the way to go.
Yes, definitely. It's inadmissibility is tricky and it's broad, so it's always good to talk with us before actually making the trip, because it can lead to many other issues down the road.
Okay. Michael O'Rourke, that's MO'Rourke at pacelawfirm.com. Thanks, Michael. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks so much, Sean. Take care.